The first weekend of set championships are in the books, but today we're going to talk about DLC Bochum. This event in Germany actually had to get spread out over 3 days to be able to fit the over 2,000 players that were signed up. As we see a total breakdown of it, there was 1,959 participants in the tournament, with Ruby Amethyst coming away with being the most represented deck at 25%. We then saw Emerald Steel at 22%, and you have to imagine the vast majority of these are Bucky Discard decks. And then Ruby Sapphire, again being Sisu, at 15%, 13% playing the Steel Wheel or not to wheel, as it's becoming a trend to see us not, or the players to not be playing the whole new world in this deck as of late. Then we have wow, can't even talk. We have Amber Steel Songs coming in as the fifth most represented deck at 5.9%. Amethyst Steel, so I wonder how much Specky had to do with this, winning the first set championship for the content creators in the UK at 4.9%. Then those Tempo players at 4%. Ruby Amber players at 4% as well. Hyper Aggro Amber Amethyst coming in at 2%. Amber Emerald, the Lemon Lime players at 1%, and then everything else represented the last 2%. So I guess the biggest takeaway for me here is not really a whole lot. If you truly think about it, this is total breakdown, and Bucky is an $800 deck. That's kind of crazy if you think that the vast majority of players are going to play it. Personally, I do think it's the best deck, although I think it's a lot closer than it had been prior. I think the other top decks are really figuring out how to tech against Bucky, and it's shaking things up. I'm going to have a big breakdown in a day or two on set championships as I compile all the information that I can find on it. As of right now, I got over 40 decks and a whole bunch of information and deck lists for nearly all of them. I'm not going to show 40 deck lists, but there's a spreadsheet linked down below. I will get all those deck core tabs updated, and instead of just pulling a couple tops here or there, I'm going to try to put every top 4 I can find from set championships into that spreadsheet. Not saying we will get to every single one of them, but we're going to try to do them all. So moving on forward then, after we have our total breakdown, what was the top 64 breakdown? Top 64 ended up being, now Bucky took over, right? So Bucky takes over here at 25 overall out of the top 64, or 40% of the meta. Again, before we had kind of mentioned about being, how did we want to put it, with Bucky Discard, it's so expensive that it just wasn't gonna be that well represented, right? There's no way that it could. So it made a lot of sense if you think about it, and I think that is why, for the most part, players just didn't play it because of the sheer cost of it. But then when you get down to topping and conversion rates, it's the best deck. It's going to take that 20% and, as you can see, nearly double it and go up to 40%. However, Ruby Amethyst is right there at 32%. This deck also is very scary good. I had set championships today, got absolutely destroyed. These are the two decks I was debating between, and I don't know, maybe I should have took Ruby Amethyst because it's really hard to play Bucky Discard when you don't see it. Had a lot of fun, got to talk to a couple people who follow the channel. I love meeting players like that, and got to see a lot of friendly faces, people who we talked to. Shout out to the local group. Then coming in at the third most in top 64 was actually the Sapphire Steel deck at 12.7%. Then we went down to Ruby Sapphire, the Sisus, all the way down to 6%, with Tempo builds at 5%, then Steel Song and Amethyst Steel rounding out those last couple percentages. Once we get to our top 32, we get narrowed down a bit more. So 16 Bucky decks made top 32. 50% of the field was Bucky. And if you look at the top 32 with Ruby Amethyst at 35%, 85% of the meta was made up of these two decks. Are we in a 2-deck format? I'm not quite ready to say that we are, but I think Ruby Amethyst is just so well equipped to do decent into everything. I think that's why we're starting to see other decks failing off, and it kind of coming down to these two decks. However, I will say if you get a great player behind Sisu or behind Sapphire Steel, watch out, because those decks are still crazy good, and don't sleep on Steel's Song either. We do have the Sapphire Steel deck coming in at 9%. I'll get an updated one that says wheel or no wheel or something at some point, so ignore the words to a degree. Someone also pointed out discard is control. Yeah, it technically is a form of control, but there's also been green steel decks that don't run Bucky that are control decks, and then there's the discard one. So I didn't think I had to put discard control and not discard control to try to separate the two of them. Anyway, Sisu does hold on in the top 32, but it's only at 3%, as is the Amethyst Emerald Tempo deck, each garnering one spot. There was 3 of those Sapphire Steels, and then the 11 Ruby Amethysts. So as we keep going down, now we're going to knock Tempo out of it, right? There's 2 Sapphire Steels, 1 Sisu, then we had 8 Buckies, and 5 Ruby Amethyst controls, making it to the top 16. So we're not seeing a whole lot change, right? We saw our top cut, which is just overly dominated by Bucky and by Ruby Amethyst. We get to top 16, same thing, same 2 decks. Sapphire Steel and Sisu is the next 2 decks. Sapphire and Steel and Sisu is the next 2 decks. Going into this event, these were the big 4. This was the format. These were the decks to beat going into set championships. This is what it was. I think Sisu vastly underperformed in this event. I'm kind of curious to see why, because I think that Bucky obviously has a good matchup versus it, but I don't think it's crazy good. Like, if Sisu can survive into that turn 6 range, anything can happen. And those players, I think, we're starting to learn that if you just really prioritize, like, your first couple turns, all you have to do is trade 1 for 1 and stay in the game. And as the game goes on, your chances of winning just get better and better and better, because the cards you're playing are blowing out your opponent more and more and more, at least in the Bucky matchup. And Ruby Amethyst 1 is the cheap deck of the format, although it's starting to creep up, and with the way things are going, if people are going to hop on this train, them card prices are going to continue to go up. Hopefully you have your Ruby Amethyst cards already, because again, that's just a meta trend that we'll see, and those card prices will go up. I don't have the top 8 breakdown. I didn't see it, but we do know what decks made top 4, and that would be 2 Ruby Amethysts. They each were separated too. They played against Sapphire Steel and against Bucky, and both Ruby Amethyst players won. So Ruby Amethyst sweeps the finals in Bochum. They come out of nowhere, and is this deck the best deck of the format once again? It's kind of funny, because just the other day before set championships, I put up my Ruby Amethyst list and said, is this the top deck again? We saw Luca go ahead and take down the 10K. He avoided Bucky Discard, and that's what everyone wanted to point out, right? He avoided Bucky Discard. Had he played it, he would not have won. Well, Ruby Amethyst played Bucky Discard in top 4 here. They didn't avoid it for the whole tournament, and they took first and second. So maybe I got criticized for saying it a few days ago. But now can we say, is Ruby Amethyst back on top? Is it the deck to beat? I don't know that it is. I think that it right now was in a very good spot and teched for the meta. But as it becomes more popular, people have to prepare for it more and be more aware that it's going to be a very prevalent threat. And by doing that, I don't mean that, people weren't ready for the deck. They were, but Bucky was the big deck in the room, right? And we're getting to a point now where you might have to shift a little bit of your focus onto Ruby Amethyst, whereas before you're like, I have to answer Bucky, have to answer Sisu, have to be able to do this. As the format shifts, this is like an ever-changing ball that the format is. You always have like your top couple decks, and you need to just make little changes, little tech choices here or there to be able to play against it. So again, make sure you check back in a few days. Every video is linked with that spreadsheet information down below. I'm going to try to once again get all the top 4 information that I can put into those, so you can see what cards are seeing play, which cards are being used, and help build your decks that way. But we do have a couple deck lists that we're going to go ahead and go on over today. Why aren't you on there, right? Had it on there. Are we back? We are back. We are back. Okay. So I just wanted to go over some deck lists. I don't see the full-on breakdown for Bochum yet, so I went and just grabbed a few lists. First, we're going to just look at is Sapphire Steel. And this list being 30 characters, so 3 Captain Hooks, which is kind of interesting because a lot of decks opted to forego the 1-drop spot and to start to play more of a back game. But that's one downside to Sapphire decks. So we see Captain Hook at 3, and then Mr. Smee at 4, which has been pretty common in these decks, and then Bucky in that 3-drop slot. So on turn 1, they have the Fortisphere and the Popsicles, and then there's the 3 Captain Hooks. They have the 3 1-drop characters, 11 1-drops total, and in the aggro matchups, or in the Bucky matchups, or however they want to do it. I guess Bucky, you'd probably go for the item in the draw, but the Captain Hook, sometimes you want to put him down and get just the board presence there too. Mr. Smee, obviously just very, very strong card, one of the best 2-drops in the game. On 4, we do have the 4, 6, and 8 being the Bell, Ariel, and Tamatoa. Interestingly enough, just the 1 Tamatoa. It's not like Ruby Sapphire where you definitely want to play all 4, but 1 just feels like it might not be enough. I don't know how I feel about that. Again, this is just one of the topping lists. I think it was top 16 on Inkdex. We'll have a bigger, better breakdown when there's more information publicly available, if you guys would like to see that. But otherwise, we have a lot of set championship information, some more decks to talk about, and all that kind of good stuff. 4 Hirams, that's pretty standard. 2 Beasts on play, popping an item, very good. Cogsworth is just crazy into the steel meta that we're in. Not as good into Ruby though, which, as we're seeing the meta shift, it's kind of going towards a Ruby. So I wouldn't be surprised to see if this deck actually starts to teeter back a bit. And if Sisu becomes less popular, like we saw in Bochum, guess what? Steel Song all of a sudden can come into the meta. And these are those small shifts that you see where now Ruby Amethyst is moving in and Sisu starts to dwindle, then other decks that were really bad into the Sisu matchup all of a sudden can find their way in. Sapphire Steel also being able to play the Babooms. We do see that this player was on a whole new world. Again, some are, some aren't. We'll have a lot more information in that spreadsheet as the week goes on. 2 McDuck Manors. I do like the location a lot. Our set championship, shout out Dave, he got his Ursula in top 4 with an Amber Ruby location deck. And it was just really strong, taking advantage of something like just in time to play a Jim Hawkins on 3, who can then bring down an RLS Legacy or a different location with him. Tiana's Palace being another one of the locations in the deck. It worked really, really well, and just not many decks are equipped to take down these big locations or that fast pace with Jim that early in the game, and it just did really good for him, and he got his Ursula. Looking now into, let's go on to a Ruby Amethyst list. This one we're seeing, just like I said, the 4 1-drops, pretty common for these decks now. Being the Chernobog on 2, then you have Snake, you have Frenemy. That's pretty much it for your 2s. You have your Foxes, your Sorceress, your Crab. So you're probably not playing Fox on 3 very often, but you have your 3 Sorceress, your Crab, or your 3-drop Sisu, who can go multi-quest and just have a ton of attack and works really well with that Flynn Frenemy. Or if you really, really need to, you can take the turn off and play one of your 4 Brawls. Or, I guess if you really have to, you could hard sing a Friends on the other side. In the 4-drop spot, we have the Merlins, not too crazy there, 8 of them. 3 B-King Undisputeds, then your Mauis, 1 Lady Tremaine, 3 Medusas, 4 B-Preps, and of course, the MVP of the format so far, 4 Queen's Castle. This card is insane. I have not seen a single card just like dominate a meta so hard. That's not true. Bucky's done it pretty good. B-Prep did it pretty good. This format, it starts to seem like Queen's Castle is moving into that spot. It's just a crazy card. And if people start to get ready for locations, I'm curious to see what that does. Because if you start to tech against locations, guess what deck doesn't play them? Bucky. So again, It is that ever-revolving ball of the format. Gonna go ahead now and look over one of the Bucky lists that did top. So on one, we have seen the Pegasus line is virtually cut from almost all these. You go for the Diablo, so you can go turn 2 Bucky, shift Diablo, and just gain a ton of advantage. I don't know if it's possible to lose when you do that playline. I'm sure you can, but man, it just feels like you're doing something wrong in such a good way. Robin Hood just being a very strong character, obviously, so you want to get him. And then the Hidden Cove being there because on like turn 3 or 4, especially like turn 4 if you played characters 1, 2, 3, on 4 you play the Cove, you move all your characters to the Cove, and now your Diablo, your little Robin Hood, you can avoid losing to grab your swords, to let the Storm Rage on, you can play around a Brawl, you can get around these other cards, and that's why we've seen Hidden Cove get played so much. Ursula Deceiver on 2 along with your Bucky. This list is playing the Sudden Chill, the 4 Storm, and the 4 Strength, so we know that we're also playing 4 Ursula Deceivers of all, and then those 3-drop Floodborns, 3 Aladdins, and 4 Diablos. Playing the Flynn package, his own biggest fan, this card can close out games so quickly once your Bucky engine is rolling. So that's why it's played at 2, because if your Bucky's not hitting and your opponent's ahead, this card just kind of feels bad. 3 Jafars for another 4-drop Floodborn to play, 4 Beast, 4 Hood, and then 2 Tinkerbells. In those song spots, we round out with a couple Grab Your Swords for the mirror matches, some We Don't Talk About Brunos, and then an Along Came Zeus to help take out big characters, to help take out those Mauis, and to help take out those locations. Nothing too crazy here. I think this deck is probably one of the more streamlined decks, and this list right here is probably a very, very standard list. If you're looking to pick up this deck, right here is a very strong list that you can do it with. So let's see, where do we got else? We have Ruby, Sapphire, we have a Sisu deck to talk about. When you're going up against Sisu, again, they're going to focus on that late game play. They're going to do just like small plays, turn 1, turn 2, draw a card, look for a card, ramp a card, do these types of things here. But what they really, really want to do is, hit that turn 2 1 jump, hit that turn 3 Hiram, or even better, or maybe not better, or in addition, you can hit the How Far I'll Go. You see this 4 songs here, the 4 1 jumps, 4 How Far I'll Go, 4 Be Prepared. Just all 3 of these cards are so strong, getting ahead on your ramp, and then getting even further ahead with the How Far I'll Go. So turn 1, you ink, say play a Popsicle, draw a card. Turn 2, you ink, play your 1 jump, go to 3. Turn 3, you ink to 4, you play your How Far, you add a card to your hand, and you put your 5th ink card in the deck, or into your inkwell. So turn 3, you already have 5 ink, you get an extra card in your hand, and it feels like if you hit that curve, this deck is just so hard to stop, because then on your next turn now you can ink, you go to 6, and not only can you say drop a Fishbone Quill, you could also come back on the same turn with like a Brawl, or you could play like Brawl, develop your brain, and get more cards. This deck just feels so good, and you get so much advantage from things like develop your brain, from Popsicle, from How Far I'll Go, from your Grammatala, from your Hiram. Being able to look and get these cards out of your deck is just very, very strong. This list in particular, I do think is actually kind of interesting. We see just the one big Sisu being played, 3 Mauis, and then we actually saw 2 Hercules Daring Demigods. I believe this was a top 64 list, so I wonder if maybe he didn't have all the Mauis, because personally I think Maui's a lot better than Hercules. The 7-3 is strong, but the 6-5, I guess it can take out a Queen's Castle in a single turn, but it's uninkable. I still would rather play 4 Mauis if you're able to, but we also see 2 Queen of Hearts Impulsive Rulers, being the rush 2/2 2-cost character to come down and deal with something, especially if they see what deck you're against. The green steel decks, they might quest with Bucky because Queen of Hearts is virtually not played. So if you come into that matchup, which can be a bad matchup if they're hitting their curve and making you discard, and they get greedy and they go sideways with their Bucky, and you come back with Queen of Hearts, well, you just got a ton of advantage in that facet. And we also see another thing here being the 2 Greatstone Dragons and 2 Fishbone Quills. A big part of this, again, is the Bucky Discard. You just get better advantage from it. And with so many decks cutting a whole new world, the Fishbone Quill just can feel not quite as good. However, it is still an incredibly strong card. One more deck we're just going to kind of go over quickly to show you guys what the format is starting to shape up and look like is Emerald Amethyst Tempo. So not many other decks get such a good strong start than Curse Merfolk Flynn Rider on 1 and 2. It feels really, really good when you hit this. It puts a lot of pressure on Sisu. It puts a lot of pressure on the Sapphire Steel, on the Ruby Amethyst, who, I mean, they can get it back. But unless you're running into like Steel Song, starting with like Merfolk Flynn feels so strong. You also have a lot of toolbox cards in here like Pascal, especially Pascal, especially if you boost it with like Crab later to take out a bigger evasive threat. You have the Queen of Hearts in here, which I actually would have to read. So play it, deal 1 damage to opposing chosen damaged opposing character. So if you get 1 damage on, say, a Diablo, like your Pascal hits a Diablo for 1, you can play Queen of Hearts, deal 1 more damage to that Diablo. She also quests for 2, so just good in that regard. We have our Ursula Deceivers in there, so you're going to be able to hit those songs. Again, Steel Song, if you're against Steel Song with this deck, you really want to try to get at least one Ursula and a Fox or a Snake, or multiple Ursulas. If you can do that and keep their songs in check, you can actually win that matchup. 3 Kit Cloud Kickers to slow down your opponent's roll, slow their tempo back. The 3 Diablos, again, I'm going to just assume here that it's because they had 3. Otherwise, I would highly recommend playing the 4th Diablo in this deck. 4 Foxes, 3 Crabs. Dolores Madrigal. This one's another one where it's a multi-quester, and as soon as you play her, assuming your opponent has an exerted character, you get to draw a card. So it just helps keep your draw up, helps in the Bucky matchup that way. And she's a multi-quester because this deck tries to close games out quick while disrupting your tempo and forcing you to answer them. And personally, I think this is a really, really strong deck. If I didn't play one of the 2 I mentioned, this had a strong shot to be that 3rd deck if I were to play it. Merlin, Goat, and Rabbit each at 4. 1 Pegasus. So we have 4 little Pegasus and just the 1 big one. I do find that a bit interesting. I've seen like 4 and 3. I do love the Shift Pegasus playline, because if you go like 1 Merfolk, or even like I don't even know, what would you go, like Pegasus, then you go Flynn on 2, Merfolk plus Flynn on 3, which obviously this is assuming you just open the nuts aggro, but you shift Pegasus, right? So that's the main point I'm getting at. You shift Pegasus and give your Merfolks, your Flynns, your Doloreses, your Queen of Hearts here. If you're playing a Jacques, he's a multi-quester. So you shift Pegasus and give all those other aggro cards evasive, and it makes it really hard for your opponent to deal with them, and then you just close out the game. 3 Ursula Sea Witch Queens. I think, yeah, 3 is okay. Personally, I've always liked it at 2. She's really good sometimes, and it's not even necessarily her preventing you from singing. It's questing for 3 and then exerting a character. That's what she really has going for, in addition to the 7 willpower. Ursula's just a really, really strong card. There's not, I can't really harp on her too bad. She's really good. And you can shift her because you're playing the 2-drop Ursula. Friends on the other side, every Amethyst deck is going to play this card at 4, 99% of the time. And Queen's Castle, 99% of the time, every Amethyst deck is going to play it at 4. So what has surprised you the most from Bochum? What do you think Set Championships is going to do? What's the craziest deck you've seen so far? So far, we have a Ruby Emerald deck and an Amber Ruby Locations deck that might be up for the spiciest Ursula winning deck list so far in this format. Thank you guys for watching. Hit the like, share, subscribe, comment down below. all that fun stuff. Like I said, lots of other things planned, and just kind of waiting for the information to roll in so I can put it into one convoluted spot for you guys to help make it easier to read and play for the format. But again, thank you guys for watching. Until next time, like, share, subscribe, comment down below.